Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to a new series of In Conversation events that we plan to run alongside our programme in the coming year. My name is Miles Thurlow, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Workplace Foundation, which is a charity set up by Workplace Gallery to support emerging and underrepresented artists based in the north of England. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a white cisgender male. I'm sitting within a virtual rendering of our first, now demolished gallery space beneath the Get Carter car park in Gateshead town centre, which has a concrete floor and high white walls with Noel Clueit's paintings made from repurposed record covers hanging on them. I am wearing a black jumper, a grey scarf, and a black jacket. My hair is short brown, slightly greying, and a little scruffy. This week, artist Noel Clueit will be in conversation with curator Maria McLintock. Noel Clueit was born in 1984 and lives and works in Manchester, UK. He completed his BA in Fine Art at Cumbria Institute of the Arts in 2007. He has recently exhibited at galleries including the Grundy Art Gallery, Blackpool, Workplace Foundation, Gateshead, Castlefield Gallery, Manchester. Clueit has undertaken residencies with Edinburgh Sculpture Workshop, Airspace Gallery, and participated in the first iteration of the Syllabus, a 10-month residency programme initiated by Wysing Arts Centre. He also co-founded the collaborative gallery programme Titledateduration with Maeve Rendle. Maria McLintock is a curator and historian of architecture and design. She works as an assistant curator at the Design Museum, London, where she has co-developed the exhibitions David Adjaye, Making Memory in 2019, and Electronic from Craftwork to the Chemical Brothers in 2020, among others. Maria is a visiting lecturer in architectural history and theory at the School of Architecture at the University of Limerick, and an associate director in design theory at the University of the Arts, London. She has written on the intersections of architecture, migration, and social systems for publications such as Architectural Review and Failed Architecture. Maria is a young trustee of the Architecture Foundation in London. Tonight, we're going to start with a short presentation by Noel, followed by Maria, and then a conversation between them both. If you could make use of the question and answer function on Zoom below to send across any questions you might have, then I'll try and interrupt towards the end of our time and ask your questions for you. Also, just to point out, as you can see below, we have live subtitling, which might occasionally be wildly incorrect, and that you can turn this on and off by clicking the closed captioning CC button sort of down on the bottom, I think it's the bottom right hand side of your Zoom screen. So I'm going to unmute and welcome Noel, and unmute and welcome Maria. Oh, I've just muted you again. Sorry, Maria. Okay. Hi, Noel.
Hello.
Hi, Maria.
Hello.
Welcome. So I'm going to disappear into the background as usual and operate images as required. I believe Maria, when Maria does her talk, has some images and is going to share her screen. So bear with us, please feel free, bear with us through any technical interruptions. Please feel free, Maria and Noel, to tell me which images to put up, etc. Okay, so I think I'm going to disappear now. How do I do that? And I'm going to share my screen here. Excuse me, everybody, while I just do this and that. Okay. Right. Noel, over to you, I believe.
Yeah. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Noel Clueit. I'm an artist. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgender male. I'm sitting in a chair in a blue and beige room with shelving behind me. I'm wearing a dark shirt. I have brown curly hair. I'm wearing glasses. That's it for my bit. I don't know if do I talk about work now? Or?
Oh yeah, Noel, do you want to start with your presentation? I can introduce myself next.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a presentation.
Ah,
Yeah, I wasn't really aware.
that's totally fine. I think
I think let's go straight into Maria. Noel, sorry about that. I think we weren't very clear.
That's all right. Okay, I'm going to try and the scary moment when you have to share screen, and hopefully I'm not going to show you loads of embarrassing stuff on my laptop. Can you see that, Noel?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to speed through this so quickly because obviously the focus of this evening should really be about Noel and his brilliant new body of work. But just to say thank you so much to Miles and Claire for inviting me to be in conversation with Noel. It's so nice to be here. Just to say, as a kind of point of confluence between my own practice and Noel's, I think part of the reason why I was invited to chat to Noel this evening was because a show that I very recently co-curated was about electronic music. It was called Electronic: From Kraftwerk to the Chemical Brothers at the Design Museum in London. And this exhibition was really a celebration of kind of the design history of electronic music and the influence of rave culture on different kind of design and artistic practices. Started off as an exhibition at the Philharmonie de Paris, which was curated by an absolute legend called Jean-Yves Leloup, who's a music journalist. And our role at the Design Museum was to really make the show have more of, yeah, as I say, a kind of design focus, but also a more localized British focus given the context. This is just a kind of idea of the graphic language of the show. The graphics were designed by Agnès Dahan's studio and the build by 10024 Architecture. And this is probably one of my favorite works from the exhibition. I think it really speaks to the kind of the kind of sensibility of the show and really what we wanted to communicate and achieve, which is this photographic print by Andreas Gursky called Union Rave. This is one of, it's part of a body of work that Andreas took in Germany in the early 1990s of photographing rave dance floors and raves across Germany. And I just love this kind of conviviality and communality that's really kind of present in this image. And what we wanted to do through this exhibition was to kind of show that very sort of, communal, energetic culture that's so inherent to electronic music. We had a focus on technology inherent in the genre. Relevantly to Noel, we also had this kind of commission by Weirdcore, who does a lot of the graphics and the vinyl and so on for Richard D. James's Alias Aphex Twins as the Collapse album. We had a few club graphics by a bunch of different fantastic designers. We're also showing the impact of electronic music on different design practices, for example, fashion. I just realized that I didn't do my proper introduction, so I'll do that at the end of this. And we relevantly to, we're doing everything slightly in a backwards manner this evening, but that's all right. I hope you're all staying with us for the journey. We also had a focus on vinyl design and vinyl covers and the impact of kind of state regulation and media narratives on electronic music and the kind of identity of the DJ as well. And we made a book, and you can visit a virtual tour, which is not the same as going to a gallery, but somewhere close to that. Now, I am very sorry that I didn't do my proper introduction previously. So I'm going to flip backwards and then we will actually get into our talk this evening with wonderful Noel. So my name is Maria and I am a curator at the Design Museum. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a cisgendered white woman. I am wearing a white shirt that says Martine Rose on it. I have red hair and I'm sitting in front of a green bookcase and a white wall in my living room. My hair is red, but maybe slightly grayer after this year because it's been quite stressful, I think, for everyone. So Noel, just to get us going with the conversation this evening, I absolutely love your new body of work. And I think there's such a lovely kind of, confluence between some of the themes that are prevalent in your own work and some of the themes that I'm interested in as well through my work at the museum. So just to get us going, could you tell us a little bit about your new body of work it's called Lockedgroove, When did you start working on this, and what was your process? What were you kind of thinking through at the time through this work?
Yeah. So yeah, these all the works in this show are from over the last 12 months. I kind of started working on the body of work, or I guess working with record sleeves, probably like over 10 years ago. So I've kind of dipped in and out using them over the years, and been collecting them since, really, probably more so in the last few years. And then, yeah, the last sort of year kind of gave that opportunity to focus on them. Like I wasn't able to kind of go to the studio, so I had to make them from home, and they were just kind of, they're the right size to work at a desk. They're all sort of 12-inch squared, roughly. Yeah, and I just sort of took to chipping away at the collection of sleeves I've built up.
Amazing. And I don't want to, we caught up the other day about, the kind of constraints that the pandemic had on your making this new body of work, namely you're without a kind of capacious studio that you're used to. You normally work in a kind of larger scale. And as you've mentioned, because of working in a kind of smaller scale, this body of work is slightly different to what you're necessarily used to. And I'm just kind of interested to know, how has that impacted your relationship to the work, or kind of the outcome of the work, or how you kind of see it going forward?
Yeah, it's a strange one, because I think there's a point where I sort of have to return to previous projects as well. So I had like a show that was due to open this time last year that was cancelled, which all the work's made for, and sort of still sits in crates. So at some point I sort of have to return to that. But I guess because we didn't sort of know how long this year, this period would be. So when I sort of started making these, I kind of knew I had this sort of, I don't know, a couple of months or something, and then that turned into more and more. So I've made a lot of the works over the period. There's 20 of them in the show. I'm not sure how many there is in total. There's maybe sort of 60. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, I'm sort of able to like access the sort of workshop again, where I have a sort of small studio space I use. I'm starting to make like larger versions of them. Some of the sleeves that I've collected over the years, I've got like multiples. I might have like 10 of the same sleeve, so they kind of lend themselves to being like larger scale works. I'm sort of still making them as like individual works. There'll just be more of them, like sort of joined together, but they won't be like one complete piece. There'll be parts. There's a couple of works in this show that are like two-parters. Mm-hmm.
For people who might not have had the chance to see I'm using C in a very abstracted way, but to visit your online exhibition, it might be helpful to just talk through kind of the fact that this exhibition kind of exists online, and maybe how the show has kind of been brought together in that format.
I don't know. I think. Yeah, I mean, Miles we were chatting about the work I've been making over the last year, and I think he sort of had seen that there was, quite a few works there. And yeah, it's just, the works were sort of ready to show. I don't think I hadn't really sort of planned for them to be shown at that point. I think I was just kind of making them, occasionally putting images of them on Instagram or whatever. And at that point, I hadn't really started to think about that sort of body of work within a gallery setting. I think I was still sort of thinking of, because I was still sort of seeing them as individual objects and individual works. Like I wasn't you know, I didn't have like a studio wall to put them on to see them in relation to one another. So when we were kind of putting the show together, that was the first time I'd sort of seen them next to each other.
So do you normally work in a more kind of site-specific way with your other projects?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I sort of usually work. Yeah, it's more sort of project-based, and there'll be a sort of research period, and usually, you know, if there's a sort of invitation to show, the space it's in like really affects the work. Like it could, you know, like sometimes sort of scrap a whole body of work and start again. I think that again is like down to the sort of conditions of what studio I've kind of had in the past. It was like the last studio space I had. Like I ran a gallery space out of with Maeve Rendle.
Mm-hmm.
So we had like a big studio, but 2/3 of it were kind of dedicated to this gallery space that would occasionally become a studio. But it kind of meant that that sort of studio practice was always a bit in flux.
Yeah.
I didn't really have the space to kind of make work and store work, and I've never really done that. I think in the past where I've done shows, I've kind of usually made the work, made the show, and then I've worked sort of temporary or destroyed afterwards. So these are sort of the first works that have like stuck around, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Probably just because it can fit in a box under my sofa.
They're really beautiful works, and I'm obviously kind of music nerd, but there is a kind of familiarity there graphically with, as you mentioned before, you're kind of collecting records from a very particular era.
That's an ABBA sleeve.
This is an ABBA sleeve.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I think I actually recognize that sleeve.
It's the album. It's a gatefold sleeve, and it's a detail around the edge of a gatefold.
I love how you kind of, I saw a couple of was looking through your work over the past couple of weeks, and I was like, I swear that's from Pink Floyd, but I wasn't quite sure. Your kind of multicolored stripe, but then there's such a kind of such a particular graphic sensibility of this period. So you're largely kind of amassing records from the 1970s, and that are forming the basis of this work. Could you, I think someone in the audience has kind of touched on this as well, but what kind of interests you in these vinyl records? Are you kind of purposefully selecting them for a graphic reason?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll just say it's probably won't be a Pink Floyd album.
It won't. Oh.
I think I'd probably go straight to eBay, you know. So I kind of, I generally sort of pick them up in charity shops and then car boot sales, which I guess hasn't happened for a while. And I think I've become sort of quite attuned to what I'm looking for. And usually it could be just like a border of a sleeve or like one little detail. Some sleeve, like the one that's on the screen now, I can't remember what record it's from, but I know that that's from like 2 of the same sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes like I'll buy one and I'll sort of stow it away and I'll wait until I find another one. Although more recently I've just had to like go on eBay and sort of pay through the nose for them. But it's just a kind of graphic detail in there that I guess sort of like tweaks the memory a bit to like how that kind of like having a painterly element to it as well.
Definitely, yeah. There really is a strong painterly element and a kind of abstract painterly element as well. But is there anything about the sound that you're interested in, or the genre, or is it purely a kind of visual thing?
Yeah, for most of them, it's like purely visual. I think a lot of they tend to kind of be like easy listening, brass bands, classical sleeves. They're the ones I kind of have to check as well. So like sometimes I pick up a sleeve and I have to like check on eBay or Discogs. Or the classical ones are like worth quite a lot, and it's
yeah, I'm sure.
But it's also, you know, I don't really want to like cut something up that has a worth as well.
Yeah.
You know, somebody's going to buy that record because they want that record. Usually these are kind of like really at the end of their life. It's like once you end up in a kind of bin at the back end of a charity shop, it's like no one's really buying them. Everybody's already like gone through them all to try and find anything good in there.
But have you found any golden eggs in your searches?
Yeah, I have at points. Yeah, I did. Where was that? Yeah, there was a few. There was, I can't remember where. I was Ashton on the line. I was in a charity shop that was closing down, and they had like loads of records. So I was kind of in there for a couple of hours, and the guy was like, "Yeah, but, you know, they're like 3 for £1 or something." And as I was kind of going through, like, yeah, I can't remember what I got from there, but there was a Led Zeppelin record, and you know, there was a few others. I was just like, he's definitely up 3 for £1. Yeah, I mean, that's like how I came to sort of picking out records anyway. It's like looking through records to find that gem.
Yeah.
And I think it's that kind of, as you're searching through and there's a kind of repetition with things, or like recognizing the same album again, like there's certain albums like, or certain artists in charity shops like Matt Monroe or someone like that. It's like guaranteed every charity shop there'll be a Matt Monroe record or a Gracie Fields record. It's like they're quite, you know, you see them a lot.
Very like specific demographic that they're targeting.
Yeah.
I find it quite interesting that these, as you say, these objects have kind of, mostly sort of reached the end of their circulation, or not their life cycle, but they've been passed through however many hands to the point where they're at this charity shop, which is sort of like the end of the road. And then you're picking them up and obviously taking kind of fragments from the covers, but there's very much a kind of new meaning that you're placing on the vinyl when you're putting them into a gallery setting. And I'm just curious, is that like a kind of intentional, how intentional is that process, and kind of what value, I know the kind of value in contemporary art is like the age-old question, but what kind of value do you think it brings to these objects?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of aware that like through making them, they're sort of becoming an art object rather than a record sleeve. Within the gallery, it's kind of, you know, they fall into a slightly sort of different system of viewing, where it's kind of interesting. Like I sort of find it interesting where people sort of look at them as paintings or as art objects rather than kind of record sleeves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, well, I don't know. I think for me, like a lot of that sort of decision making and sort of composition, and yeah, I guess like the shape of the works as well. Like there's something that relates back to painting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm aware that they're sort of speaking that language as well, which I think the gallery kind of emphasizes that.
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of be consumed more as that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It is really interesting that they've kind of been made public through this, I'm sure, not interesting view and actually just really annoying view, but they've been made public through this online platform. Do you think you would show them in another kind of physical setting? I know you're working on other projects at the moment, right?
Yeah, I've got like another an exhibition of these sort of in real life opening next month. A space called Studio 2 in Todmorden, which artist Matthew Holding runs. So that was, that's kind of been sort of planned for a while with these works. I think it's going to be it's a different sort of experience putting this show together than a usual one. Like this was kind of just done by screen, and yeah, it's sort of interesting. I don't know.
Dropping objects around. I mean, I spend so much of my time as a curator not doing the things that people think a curator does, which is like standing in a grand gallery, wearing gloves and hanging objects in place, but actually on like spreadsheets and looking at objects in a very digital way anyway. But I can't really imagine how that, I don't know how involved you were in the process of kind of curating this exhibition, but how odd that would feel as an artist who's so used to kind of physicality.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of akin to that. I think it's like, I think like with this show, I was sort of happy with Miles and Max kind of taking control of placing the works in the show. So they sort of did an initial placement, and then I came in over Zoom and just sort of said maybe about there. And you know, that was like dead quick. Like I'm really used to sort of, you know, that process of kind of moving works and placing them, resting them against a wall for a while, and like, you know, it takes a long time. Whereas as this was like, you know, in relation to that, it's like super quick. So yeah, I don't know. It's like it's weird because it's sort of, the works are just sort of images, and then they're images in a space. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about your, because I slightly nerded out the other day when we were emailing and chatting that you'd actually worked, you have this other kind of connection to vinyl, and that you worked for Boomcat in Manchester, which doesn't exist anymore, is only online.
Yeah. It's only been online for some years, really.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually realize that. I'd heard about them years ago, and then I was like figuring out what's happening with Boomcat before this talk, and I saw that everything's online. And you were there at quite an interesting moment. You mentioned that you, while you were working there, Richard D. James released Cyril, Aphex Twin released Ciro, which I was just like, wish I was there in that moment. But how do you think that your experience of kind of working in that store and kind of being, I guess, part of a culture of exchanging vinyl and exchanging music, has any of that kind of fed into this body of work at all?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I also, like, when I was probably sort of 16, 17, I used to work in my sort of local record store, who they had to give me a job because I had a tab that I couldn't pay off. So they gave me a Saturday job, and I worked through there. I think, yeah, maybe I was 17. I must have worked there like through summers or something.
How do they even work out? Is it like seven vinyl per 4 hours or something?
I used to like save my lunch money and then go in and just buy like 7 inches, and then, you know, over sort of a couple of years or something, probably built up enough of trust to just be like, oh yeah, I'll pay for this next week.
Yeah.
And I think they might have had to call my mum at one point. Be like, oh, he owes us quite a lot of money.
And your mum was like, well, he shall work for those vinyls then.
It was a good way to get a job. Like, I was pretty terrible at it. But that was kind of an interesting time to sort of work in a record store anyway, because I sort of remember at that point, like, mainly all they sold was CDs, and like mini discs had just come in as well. And then,
oh gosh, mini disc.
Yeah, like they had such a brief window.
Such a brief window. Like literally a year or two, no? I don't even think, I think that kind of skipped me by, probably holding a cassette and then.
Probably like a year, I don't know. They're just like, yeah, they didn't really last. And it was only ever like really big releases you got on mini disc. But at that time, it was like, then they were sort of trying to get rid of all their cassette tapes. And I remember at one point, I think it was like 10 for £1, might have gone to like 20 for £1. So we couldn't give them away. And now, sort of like when I was working at Boomcat, sort of, that was a few years ago now, and there was this sort of revival of tape cassettes, which was, you know, still in now. It's like,
Yeah,
artists are still releasing tapes, which is kind of quite interesting, you know, those formats come back around.
definitely. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought, like, I think, yeah, why I sort of mentioned that Aphex Twin release as well was that, like, the build up to that album was so sort of digital as well, and it was kind of,
Yeah.
a lot of it was sort of kept quite secret. Like, I don't remember getting any kind of promos for the record or anything, and it was usually sort of, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 releases every year that we kind of had to like prepare for. You know, we knew it would be really busy, and that one really sticks because that was probably the busiest. Like, packing an album for about 2 weeks.
Yeah, even now he works in a very kind of, I mean, it's not spontaneous, but there's a kind of element of spontaneity with the Collapse album. I think that was announced through like a projection mapping event, I think outside like Shoreditch High Street station. And it was like, I don't know, almost like in Harry Potter, where like you see the sign in the sky and you're like, oh, okay, that album is coming out.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that he was working in that way back then.
Yeah.
And also, I think what I found like really fascinating about researching for electronic is how something that's kind of inherent to your work as well, that kind of culture within so many musical genres like new romantics, punk, electro, like house and techno, that culture of sampling and collaging and sharing across different genres and kind of different artists. Could you kind of talk about that process at all within, I think a couple of people again have sort of touched on this in the Q&A. Someone's questioned, is it important if the viewer kind of recognizes an album or kind of a graphic element of an album in your work? How much are you kind of overtly sampling and collaging, and how much of it is just quite a discrete part of your process?
I think for the works in this show, I mean, they're all untitled, which is, to be honest, like a lot of them, like I couldn't tell you what that album sleeve is on the screen right now. I've sort of no idea. So it's sort of, and probably because I didn't want another one. It was like, that's going to make one work and that's fine. So yeah, and I think some of the works I'm making now are like, they will be titled and they will sort of have a reference to the sleeve they're from.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it might just be like, I don't know, 4 Brotherhood of Man sleeves or something. Like, just be quite explicit about it. I don't think, yeah, it's not like I'm sort of purposely kind of hiding where they're from.
Yeah. This one on the screen right now, the polka dot cover, do you remember where that's from? I love this one.
I know it's a 12-inch single, I know that. And that the flashes of red are a woman's dress.
Ah.
So, yeah, it's been like quite sort of cropped out.
Yeah, like super abstracted.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really nice for you to tell everyone about your kind of Reader's Digest, Richard Smith triangle that you sort of discovered.
Yeah, kind of where they started, really. I think that was, I mean, this kind of going back a long time. That's sort of back to my degree show. I was again sort of like from going to charity shops, there was sleeves that I was kind of seeing again and again, and one of these was this like box set of Bert Camford and James Last, Easy Listening. It's like a nine vinyl box set, so it's quite a big thing. There's a lot of them in Carlisle. I think like James Last is just really popular in Cumbria. And I think, yeah, around that time, I must have sort of been looking at Richard Smith's work as well, because I was sort of aware that like, oh, that album sleeve looks a lot like one of his paintings. And there was these two paintings that he'd made in 1968. Yeah, and the cover of this box set was exactly like one. And then one of the albums, which like a live album inside, was like really close to another of his paintings. So I'd started kind of collecting them, and I'd used them to make a work, which sort of, it didn't really work at the time. And I've used it since. I've made like a few more works from that box set, and they've never really like done the right job. But I do have a lot of them. But there was this, when I was sort of reading up about Richard Smith, there was this article I'd read at the time, which like I can't find now. It'd be great if somebody can shed a bit of light on it. But it was about him sort of not like quitting art, but a kind of disillusion with the paintings he was making. About it was sort of kind of to do with like this sort of commercial popularity of painting at the time, which I sort of then linked back to these Reader's Digest sleeves, and maybe that's what he was talking about. Like he'd been making this work, and then his work had kind of just been sort of lifted from and bastardized a bit, and put on, you know, the cover of a box set that people would buy out the subscription page of Radio Times or whatever. It's like, yeah.
Couldn't be farther from like Tate Gallery's exhibition in the eyes of
Yeah, it's like they probably weren't even sold in record stores, those box sets. So it's like shopping channel music. So.
Yeah. So I love that you discovered that. Have you had any other kind of, I guess, discoveries around different sort of graphic intentions across these? Because you must have spent such a long time studying these vinyl albums in quite a close kind of way. Yeah,
there's some that are like, you know, really obvious. There's some that look exactly like a Frank Stella or a Bridget Riley. You know, and of course, you know, they were kind of super popular at the time, so why not? You know, if there's a sort of designer kind of having to put out like hot hits compilation or something, they're probably going to lift like something they're interested in, or maybe they've seen. I don't know. It's kind of weird because I get like those days are, you know, before sort of the internet and before social media. Like images were consumed in a different way. So like where now we can sort of see those kind of correlations really quickly. Like, whereas then, like.
So I was kind of thinking slightly the opposite. Like, yes, we can in some ways through kind of, in a very recent way through like Google image search, which obviously uses like machine learning to, you can search for an image and you get similar images. And actually I used it quite recently for something at work and was kind of shocked at how obscure the image I'd searched for, and how, how similar and how easy it was to get to the root of this image that I was looking for a credit line for. But as you were saying that, I was thinking actually during the kind of art movements of 60, 70 days, or any kind of visual culture trend, because of the much kind of, I guess, the distinctness firstly of those very specific kind of visual moments, and also the much slower pace in which trends unfold and kind of proliferate, that it's sort of easier to me, but actually I haven't gone down the journey that you have, but it's sort of easier to go, oh, okay, Bridget Riley was very much active as an art artist. At this point, I can look to kind of, I don't know, Mary Quant and see, or vice versa, and see those very distinct lines. Whereas today, everything's moving at such a quick pace. And I think there's such a kind of, there's so much kind of looking backwards as well to older visual trends, definitely in graphic design and the design of albums. So I sometimes I'll come across a kind of graphic object and think, oh, that's definitely from X period, especially now when I'm mostly looking at things online, and you're kind of surprised that it was designed like a year ago.
Yeah, I guess I mean sort of now, like I think it's say if something like that happened, you know, sort of with Richard Smith, if there's that work sort of being taken and used for commercial purposes as well. Like now it's sort of quicker because I think people call it out.
Definitely.
That's more what I mean by it, you know, it's sort of, if that was to happen now, it would just have like so many comments below it going, this is this artist's work, or
yeah.
Yeah, you see that a lot. Like,
I mean, there's a huge incident last week, a couple of weeks, with Lil Nas X's new music video, and it kind of came to light that seemingly, I don't know how this was resolved, but I think some of the kind of maybe the mood, maybe I think it was one of FK Twigs's videos were kind of used in a mood board as a kind of reference for this other music video, and very quickly that was kind of brought to the attention of the masses on public media, sound like such a granny, on the public media, on social media. And I've seen that happen loads. Yeah, that kind of, people are very critical of, not in the way that you're kind of approaching your work, but I guess when there are kind of contemporaries there, and maybe one is competing for a space that the other is occupying, and maybe that one is kind of taking from the other. That's the kind of big public issue now. Whereas with yours, there's kind of vernacular to what you're doing that's less.
Yeah. But it sort of happens now, because I think that, like, if you're sort of consuming images via Instagram or whatever, you know, or Pinterest or something like that, it's like you're seeing so much more. You know, like something can end up on a mood board that, like, could be there, you know, it might not even be that sort of important to that mood board. It might be like a little thing and somebody else might not recognize it or whatever. But yeah, as we sort of see kind of more and more images, and we're seeing them via Instagram and via Pinterest and via things with like algorithms in place to kind of define what makes a good image, what is a good image. And like, as those sort of images are built up, more and more slip out. Right? That's the internet. Anyway, I think that's why, like, I really sort of struggle to find that article about Richard Smith. Like, you know, we were emailing and I was trying to find this image of that other painting and I can't find it at all. Like, it's sort of disappeared from Google because all these other images are under other ownership. Like, you know, whether it might be Tate who owns it, it's like they hit the top of a pile. So then that sort of, like, yeah, it's interesting when you're kind of working in the visual field and you're sort of, you know, obviously, like, people want to sort of be original with what they're doing as well. But then, yeah, you're sort of open to this world where you're just seeing so much stuff.
Yeah.
At a moment as well, I guess. But
exactly, because we're so kind of extrapolated from any physical experience, and are also desperate for a kind of escape from our very immediate physicality. So we're kind of scrolling and scrolling. It's something that I talk to about students a lot, that kind of, especially more kind of art-based students that I teach. And it comes up, I've kind of noticed a shift in those sort of like studio crit environments where maybe 3 or 4 years ago, even as short as that, it was very kind of your role as a respondent or your role as a teacher is to kind of offer students a plethora of references, then more so with the intention that they can actually bring that work or that another approach into their own practice, and maybe that, you know, they would refine their practice for that reason. But now when I'm teaching students, I'm like, this thing that you're showing me is actually incredibly similar to this thing. Do you know that's happening? And are you like situating yourself in this broader kind of visual context, which feels, like you say, like kind of so much more important now than it's ever been. But also at a time when there are just an unbelievable amount of images that were kind of, we're very kind of visually literate people, I guess, for that reason.
Yeah, I feel sort of quite fortunate that like I sort of studied at a time when this didn't really exist. Right? You know, and there always sort of had to be that awareness of, you know, what other things existed, or, you know, it wasn't just sort of, I don't know, like maybe it was sort of simpler to do that. Well, it was, it was sort of loads simpler.
I know we were talking the other day about your interest in kind of, I guess, the canon of art history, and we've kind of gone through this quite a lot now, but just to kind of draw that conversation out a bit further, more particularly with your own art practice, you're, I guess you're interested in the sense that through putting these artworks in an exhibition, there's an element of canonizing that happens there, whether or not you want that to happen. And there's an effect there on the kind of originality of your own work. You made some really interesting comments the other day about, how those cycles kind of happen and what authorship or originality means to you.
Yeah, and I'm sort of interested in what, you know, the gallery does with that as well, like how ideas are presented in that space and like what that space does to ideas as well. I don't really know what else to say about it.
I've just spotted we actually have quite a few questions from the audience. I feel like I've been taking over too much. Miles, do you think now would be a good time?
Hi.
To kind of...
Yeah.
Hey.
Right. Okay. If I can work out how to do this Q&A thing, it kind of does. It's. I think it's because I'm screen sharing, so I might just stop doing that. And what have I done? Here we are. Okay. Right. Okay. A couple you've answered already, I think, Noel. So Claire says, is there any importance in viewers specifically recognizing, oh, no, we've had this one, haven't we? Recognizing which vinyls the graphics have come from, or is the dissociation a point of interest for you? You've answered that already, so I'm going to ignore that one. Go through to the next. Thomas says, what do you do with the records themselves?
At the moment, they're all just stored. They're on a shelf, and I'm sort of waiting to sort of work out what I'll do with them. I thought at one point I might, like, I don't know, I thought I could give them to someone doing a workshop, you know, and you sort of make bowls out of them in your oven. But now I've kind of got too many to sort of burden somebody with that. There's like hundreds.
Right. I don't know. I feel like you could drop them off to an art college and someone would go.
Maybe. But I've sort of been thinking about, it's like there's a few sort of plastics companies now that like make surfaces out of yogurt pots and things like that. So
circular economy.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Like I might see if I can have something made like that with it. But then I've kind of got no purpose yet. I have to have like a vinyl kitchen or something.
So you're telling us you don't want to sit around on the weekend listening to Reader's Digest records?
Well, maybe I'll do that. Maybe, like, I'll just have a year where I'd listen to every single record.
That could be part B of the project, a very
Yeah.
performative.
Without any of the liner notes or anything, because they're all done. Like, won't have the track listings. Yeah.
Amy asks, these can easily be read as paintings. Do you think you would have made a series of paintings if you weren't using found materials?
Yeah, they're kind of, I think when I kind of started making them, or sort of putting them together, so first I'd cut out the bits that I want to use and sort of blue tack them to a piece of paper, blue tack that to a wall, and then that would sit there for a couple of weeks. But there's always that sort of thing about where I thought, yeah, these are kind of studies for paintings at some point down the line. But yeah, it's like having the time to sort of make them as paintings. It's like they've become their own thing. I think that there are some that are definitely like, I'd like to sort of one day stretch some canvas and get to work. But I'm not a painter, so they'll be shit.
No.
I think, well, no, but it's also like,
no, from my,
you know,
no.
making these and sort of using sort of polyfiller and household paints and things like that, and masking areas off and spraying them, that is all sort of like practice towards painting.
Yeah.
But I think if they, you know, there's still like decisions to be made where like, would it be canvas or would it be board or would it be on aluminium? Would it be spray painted? And all those sort of things are kind of slowly coming through. I'm just not sure yet.
Anonymous attendee asks, I love the architectural quality of the work, the shapes and forms within each image, and also the fact that some of them appear to be more objects than collage painting. They make me think of fragments of buildings, doors, floor plans, views through space. Is that just something that appears within this selection of works, or is this throughout the whole collection? Is this a part of your thinking / aesthetic?
Yeah, definitely with some of them, I think. Yeah, some more than others. There's more that, well, aren't in this show that are sort of more shaped and have parts removed, and I could definitely see like an architectural relation with that. Yeah.
Might be nice for you to talk about your other, some of your other projects that are kind of larger scale. You were talking about a project the other day that's kind of, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about this on the call, but one that's sort of sitting in crates for the moment.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, it's quite a ramble. Yeah, that project, I mean, that sort of will happen at some point. I think, yeah, I need to get back to it. That show is kind of essentially, or that body of work is all sort of connected to some emails that were sent to an image stockholder called Dreams Time that own sort of 12 images of Spiral Jetty, Robert Smithson's sort of seminal artwork, 1972. And all these images are kind of like really nice, clear blue sky, sort of purple hue in the water, and they're like landscape photography rather than like of the artwork. Whereas the sort of document of the artwork that's owned by like Dear Art Foundation now, I think it used to be owned by MoMA, it's just this black and white aerial shot. So like when I was sort of studying or, you know, like younger and sort of interested in art, but like I always knew that work, like Spiral J, and I always knew it as like this black and white shot of this artwork that existed somewhere in America, you know. But it was like an image. I only ever knew an image of it. I didn't know the artwork itself. And the artwork, like over the years, is eroded and the water levels have risen, have gone back, and well, you know, it's sort of, it's only there as a fragment. And then there's loads of sort of things around the ownership of Spiral Jetty as well. There's loads of different issues over like who owns the work, who owns the land, who owns the image rights of the work, all these things. So I'd kind of emailed this image stockholder who provide stock images for a license fee, sort of asking these questions and kind of getting quite blunt responses, like, you know, and quite technical, and like, who's this guy sort of bothering me? And then kind of writing to them sort of about this proposed journey, or my idea of like going to sort of seek out this artwork in the middle of Utah and getting on a Greyhound bus and getting a yellow taxi, or, you know, all these kind of things that are like very iconic and very American.
Yeah.
And it's quite a long email, and it's quite a bit about Robert Smithson and whether the guy I'm speaking to, whether he like knows the artwork. And oh yeah, one thing as well, totally forgot to mention, is Dreamstime, the company, their logo is a spiral. Right?
Oh.
Their watermark on every image is a spiral. So
no way.
So I've really started this story in a convoluted way. It started by somebody asking me, what is Spiral Jetty?
Right.
And me sort of going on my phone and Googling Spiral Jetty, and then one of the images that came up was an image of Spiral Jetty that was owned by Dreamstime, that had a big watermark of a spiral directly over the spiral. And I was like, oh, that's quite nice. So then my whole thing with them was sort of asking permission to use, I never mentioned this to them. I never sort of like wanted to say, you know, oh, it's because there's a spiral on this. I sort of wanted you know, them to sort of say, oh, our logo's a spiral, how coincidental.
Yeah.
I mean, never did. And it's sort of, yeah, I wrote this sort of 2-page email to them about this journey, and this guy emails me back and he's just like, no, highlighted in blue is everything I don't need to know. Highlighted in yellow, I need to know. And there's like one sentence. It's just like, it's like this really sort of technical thing. And it's quite a long set of emails. It's like 12 pages long. So the work for the show kind of uses those emails as a vehicle to sort of produce other works. So that show is like, yeah, there's various works for it, but it sort of relies upon like the work being read without the context of the email. Yeah. So the email would be there, like that correspondence will be there as a handout, but it's kind of a secondary thing, you know. So it's sort of, and that's kind of where I'm sort of interested in exhibiting, I guess, or exhibition spaces, is what do people do when they walk into a show, look at it, how do they consume that work? To the point, you know, some people like go in and have a press release and walk around with it, you know, like, and that's, yeah.
Yeah, and how does that change your experience of the work?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
People that will just kind of walk through in 5 seconds, and the people that will read the exhibition handout forensically and then engage with the work kind of as you intended, or you want them to engage with it. Yeah,
and the work can be sort of like, you know, read as sculpture or video or whatever it may be in that space, whatever works I kind of made or whatever. And like allowing them to be that as well, like allowing it to sort of be a sculpture or be a video. But then ultimately it does have this kind of set of emails, which are kind of like the rule it sort of sits by, I guess.
I can't wait to see that. Hopefully when it sees, I'm sure it will find
it's a really
way to gallery.
Because I've been kind of working on that for a while, but it's like, yeah, probably like 2 years, because we kind of lost a year. And the first show was kind of crucial, because that was the sort of first show where work would actually exist. So although I've made the work, it's like these things don't sort of really function as just isolated objects. But then we sort of started to think about that show as a publication and doing the work. So it could be that rather than an exhibition. It could be images of the work. I don't know. Hard one to pitch.
Does this, I'm kind of interested in how this might cross over into some of your experience, Maria, of exhibition making, if you like, and the sort of the both to do with the kind of litigious kind of emails that you might have to deal with in terms of borrowing and lending things, but also in terms of how things are presented and how you want an audience to read an exhibition. It's quite interesting. Just as Noel was speaking, I was just wondering what your experience was of that.
Yeah, well, I think because my experience is mostly in a museum or two museums that present contemporary design. I have shown kind of fine art, contemporary art before, when they kind of are relevant to a broader design issue or social issue that we're disseminating through design. And I think there is quite a distinct difference between presenting an exhibition in a museum. It says something else to presenting an exhibition in a gallery as well. We are very kind of, museums are like desperate to know who their publics are. I mean, galleries are sort of as well, but I think a gallery has a capacity to shape an audience, whereas a museum kind of needs more and more audiences, particularly now because of how just difficult and neoliberal the United Kingdom is and how hard it is to maintain a kind of viable museum. You have to ensure that you are being, well, that's the kind of financial side of things, but we have to make sure that our building is accessible, that our exhibitions are accessible and lucid, engaging, and inclusive spaces as well. You know, we want a broad demographic of people to feel like our exhibitions are there for them, that our building is welcome to them. And yeah, so I kind of work in a slightly different way, but I probably more obsessively, I think what Noel, the kind of settings that you work in and the sorts of institutions or organizations that you work with, it's more of a kind of poetic sort of mediated experience. Whereas for us, it's like we start an exhibition with an interpretation plan and we have key messages and we have a hierarchy of language. I don't know, maybe you do that as well, but I guess working in a museum, there's a kind of very formal, quite rigid process that you go through. There are massive pros to that, but I think for an artist, I guess it's why there aren't so many kind of bigger national museums who do exhibitions of kind of critical contemporary art, because yeah, it's just much harder to kind of, I don't know, enforce those kinds of experiences on visitors for work that's meant to be existing above that plane in a way, and meant to be a kind of emotive or introspective, or the experience is more slippery and you can't really quantify it. Whereas we're always trying to quantify the experience that we want our visitors to have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So, and sorry, Noel, just to sort of move away from your work for a moment, but it's really fascinating to me. And I'm also interested in whether or not you might think that the sort of new shifts towards a kind of digital sort of content that can surround exhibitions and artworks. Well, maybe that might liberate the museum away from this very kind of prosaic sort of description, if you like, of things, and allow them to become more poetic. You know, it's just an interesting idea.
Yeah, it is interesting. I'm not really sure what aspects of this new way of working we'll hold on to. Actually, what we've done a lot more of doing what we're doing now, which is kind of hosting talks. We did we've done a couple of virtual tours for our shows, which, you know, they're not like ideal, but actually they were such a good way to keep our audiences kind of engaging in what we do. And I think for artists like Noel, having to spend a whole year in lockdown and not able to kind of have a setting for your work would have just been so terrible. But yeah, I'm not sure how the pandemic will impact the way that we program our shows. Obviously, there's a kind of need to make viable exhibitions over the next few years. Obviously, the sector has been very harshly hit by closures, and it's a bit of a horrid time, I think, for any arts institutions. But yeah, we'll have to see how that goes. I'm really, really, really looking forward to being back in the building in mid-May when we can reopen. That will be lovely.
Absolutely. Right, I've got another question here for Noel. Hi, Noel. This is from Gabrielle. Great to see your work online and hear about the process compared to more site-specific work. Looking back and with distance, what would you say you discovered about your style? Would you say that there is a difference between intention and intuition?
I don't know. I think these works sort of feel more intuitive, just through the process of making. But I guess there's still an intention. They're still sort of driven by an idea. You know, I'm still kind of aware of how they kind of look or how they will look, which I think runs through kind of all my work. There is like an element of design with like past works, but maybe not quite as much intuition. I think usually when I kind of make work, I'm working on a show, so I'm aware of the space as well. So it does feel like designed. It does feel kind of made for that space. Whereas these are sort of the opposite of that. So yeah, more intuitive. Does that answer it?
A great answer.
But it's nice to like be doing work that sort of feels more intuitive. I think past works have maybe kind of been sort of too sort of rigid as well. And I think that can sort of wrap the work up a bit, you know, at idea stage as well. A lot of works can already feel done without even doing them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
like almost you have a sense of this space that your work is going to go on show, and you're almost just kind of, you're mocking that up as opposed to developing the work. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of ideas or projects that are abandoned because I can kind of, maybe through that process of thinking about those works in a space, it sort of does its job for me. You know, they're kind of completed in my head. So like I can't see them getting any further, whereas other works like do rely upon an audience and you know, more of that kind of making and
Did you think about like a digital audience at all with this show? Were you thinking like, oh, how are people going to be?
No, like when I sort of started making these works, for a long time, and I sort of still am, I was thinking that the end point with them would be publication. I didn't think I'd ever sort of really reach a gallery wall. I thought they'd just sort of, because I know, probably because of taking photos of them and putting them on Instagram as well, and like flattening them back out to what they were before. There's a lot that will just be back as, you know, back to graphics or return to that form. And then some of the works kind of don't. I think there's a lot of, I think what's sort of missed in the Workplace Foundation show is the edges of the work as well. So there's quite a bit of detail in the edges. So I'm kind of looking forward to having a physical show with them where
Yeah.
those can be seen as well. And I think that sort of places them maybe away from painting and more just into objects.
Definitely, I guess, because it's, yeah, you get such a better, I mean, you get the sense of physicality when you are in a physical space. Obviously, that's a very obvious point, but just to reiterate what you've said.
We've done our best to kind of give a hint of physicality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a yeah, we don't quite make it. But anonymous attendee asks, certain works of yours solely utilize the record sleeves themselves, whilst others incorporate acrylic and oil paint, and in some instances decorating filler. What prompts your decisions with medium?
Sometimes it's just kind of a space that needs filling. I think if it's like a small space, filler kind of works. I think oil paints kind of came later. I think maybe in the last 6 months. Before that, it was more sort of just like polyfiller or polyfiller.
Decadent over the last 6 months. So you thought,
yeah, that's shocked. Like before that, it was just what's kind of in the cupboard, and it was decorators filler and some tubes of white watercolor that I could mix in. But I still like using those. I'm not just like moved on to oil paint. And some, I think, like oil paint as well, like give really nice texture to the work. And some works kind of really need that. I think some of the sleeves that are quite glossy and really flat and probably in quite good condition kind of need the oil paint as a bit of a contrast and sort of soften them. Whereas some of the other sleeves that are quite tatty or like have a matte finish, like maybe I sort of do less with them.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of quite like that tattiness as well.
Do you think your work as a technician, as a kind of gallery, because you work as a freelance gallery technician, or if that's the right, it's not just a gallery technician, it's sort of making crates and objects and
it's do fabrication. Yeah, definitely has like an input like into what I do and how I sort of, especially with these works, how I think about them and how I kind of make them. And I think that's probably why they've not sort of become a painting, you know, or I've not sort of gone down that route of making canvases or sort of more traditional kind of surfaces.
It's funny, the technicians that we work with at the museum, kind of, I don't know if it's mean to say this, but some of the best technicians that we work with are artists outside of their work, in fabricating exhibitions and installing exhibitions. Just have such a kind of incredible eye for detail and understanding of materials. Got a few really amazing artists that work for us. I feel like this next question is a really lovely, like, towards the end.
It's a nice segue, isn't it?
Yeah.
2-minute break.
Yeah.
Sorry, I really need a week. Talk amongst yourself.
I love that.
Maybe
that
mute.
honesty. I would have been like, oh, there's a squirrel in my kitchen. This
is a sort of first for Workplace Foundation online gallery talk. Artist disappears to have a wee.
Disappearing artist.
But
well, now we get to creep on Noel's amazing studio.
Yeah, beautiful studio.
Worst toilet in Scotland? That was a funny question. No,
that's a reference. That's actually this is from Graham, who is an artist that lived in Newcastle until fairly recently. I think now lives in Texas, but it's a reference to Workplace in Gateshead, which really has an absolutely awful toilet at the back. So you have to walk down this very long, thin corridor.
Right.
And then you sort of turn right, and then in the corner of another room is a sort of toilet that's sort of worthy of train spotting.
Oh my gosh.
I found one day while I was idling in the worst toilet in Gateshead, if you like, that somebody had scrawled above the lintel to the door, "the worst toilet in Scotland," which is a direct quote from train spotting.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's like,
And then I think it might, I have my suspicions that it might be Graham himself, who's just appeared on the chat. But anyway, thanks Graham for that, because it's given Noel time to.
Yeah, that was a nice kind of tie over.
I think we're going to now move. We're now going to move into our last and final question, which is from Amy. And Amy says, "These works make me feel so optimistic for art and in a general sense. Does making work with found materials paradoxically give you greater freedom?"
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, probably. Yeah, in a weird way. I mean, I think it's sort of, yeah, maybe it sort of sets out a kind of boundary as well, like where it, you know, I think the works in this show, like they're abstract works, but you can't really sort of get too much into that kind of abstract side of things. They don't follow that same process. It's like they are abstract images, but they're from quite a rigid process. Like, does that make sense? Yeah,
I think it does. I think it's a very good answer and a very good point at which to wrap things up. So
I couldn't wait the last 2 minutes.
You're always told to avoid the avoid toilet chat in talks, right?
Well, we've broken all the rules tonight.
We've broken all the rules. We've done everything in a backwards way. I love it.
It's brilliant.
Noel's going to do his presentation now.
So I'm going to very soon end this webinar, which will be very abrupt and cruel to such a sort of lovely, you know, really pleasant evening just listening to you two discuss art and discuss Noel's work and your experiences as well, Maria. So thank you so much, both of you, for that.
Yeah, thanks, Maria.
And also I'm gonna ask you, because it's so cruel and abrupt, we'll catch up very briefly afterwards in the green room. And I wanted to also thank Claire Gomez, our assistant director, and Max Lee, our general manager, for all their support in putting on this talk. Max particularly has been very busy sort of figuring out Eventbrite and Zoom and all, and also this really interestingly good sort of CC, which has been quite creative, I think, in the background. I've been reading it. It's been great. And just to let everybody know that this talk's been recorded. We'll get it transcribed properly and we'll put it up on our website. So you'll be able to read it, watch it, read it at your leisure. So thank you very much. Like I said, we plan to carry on this series of In Conversations, which we'll do through the year, and we'll publish that on our website and on Instagram, etc. So
I've just realized that there's a Q&A box. I was wondering, like, I was like, how's Maria so prepared with these?
Just really tapped into the audience after my long ramble about the museum audience.
Sorry, this is like the 4th time I've used Zoom, and 2 of those times to do a quiz. So
brilliant. Right, everyone, I'm going to end it now. Next time.
Bye.